Welcome to Sales Talk for CEOs. I'm glad you're here. I'll be interviewing CEOs who have successfully scaled their B2B sales organization. In each episode, I'll start by uncovering the sales background of each CEO, dig into the strategies they use to build their sales organization, and wrap it up with what the future holds. We'll cover the good, the bad, and the ugly of scaling a sales organization. I'm your host, Alice Hyman. A lot of you CEOs out there want to know about how do you grow a business and sell it and then start another one. Well, my guest today can tell you exactly how to do that because he has successfully grown Cobalt and sold it not too long ago, and then started a new company called Ressemble. So we're going to actually talk about both of those. I want to welcome to the show Rasmus from Ressemble. Hi, Rasmus. How are you?
Hey, Alice. Thanks for the introduction. I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. So I know you're right outside of Boston. How's the weather out there today?
It is pretty warm, actually. So
yeah,
I'm hiding inside with AC.
Yeah. It's been beautiful here as well. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I want you to tell the audience a little bit about what Kobold did, what you built there, and then what Ressemble does. And then we're going to jump back to, kind of the beginning after we talk about a few of the challenges. So tell us what Kobold did.
Yeah, sure. So Kobold was started to disrupt capital formation in the private markets. So we focused on asset allocators investing in private equity and venture capital firms. And what we discovered was they struggled understanding what was going on with their portfolio, and they also struggled benchmarking because a lot of the information was coming to them through spreadsheets or sale data sets. And so we built a portfolio monitoring solution servicing both the GP and LP market and provided benchmarks.
So that you had the company almost 8 years, right, before you sold?
Yeah, we founded it in 2011, Mike, Patrick, and I, and then the transaction was actually closed last winter, fall. And then I operated the company for 8 years of those.
And so you kind of were in selling it and starting up Ressemble at the same time?
Yeah. I transitioned out from being kind of like day-to-day in the company in 2019, end of 2019, early 2020. And then during that time, I started Ressemble, and then we had hired someone to lead the company through the exit and, worked with the board and supported them through that process, and then got the company sold.
All right. So here you are closing one company and beginning another. Tell us just a little bit about what Ressemble does.
Yeah. So Ressemble is really founded on some of the experiences. Well, I know we'll get into that soon from and experiences and learnings from Cobalt, but Ressemble is focused on sales leadership, and it's really trying to help sales leader navigate the fact that we have more and more tools in sales, more and more specialized teams in sales, and more data sets. And we want to give sales leaders more real-time access and give them more technology to support them working with their teams.
Right. It's like, what about the sales leaders?
Yeah, I mean, it's like everyone is building to make it fast and easy for the reps, but sales leaders actually manage more deals than reps. They have 200 deals they're looking at, not 20.
Right. Exactly. All right. So let's talk about the challenge that you had at Cobalt that caused you to start another company, Ressemble.
Yeah. So, it's as a, I guess, CEO, you kind of early on when you build sales, I was very much involved, helped close the first deal at Cobalt. We built up, we leaned a lot on the founder story to get these early clients, endowments and private equity firms. And then you get to the point where you have maybe $1 million revenue and it's time to hire someone and you're super excited. You hire a great sales leader, VP of sales. And I think my approach to that was very much great. Now I have a partner who's going to run this for me. I can focus on customers, on product, on investors. And I think my learning was that as a CEO, I can never really take my eye off the ball when it comes to sales. And I always need to understand where the market is, why are people buying, who is buying, how are they buying, and otherwise I can't really be supportive in terms of strategy or tactically with my sales team. And so that was one of the really big challenges. We went through 3 VP of sales during my tenure.
Wow.
And I think that says it all. Like, and it was great people. Like, I love them all, still in touch with them. But I think more part of the, as I look back at it, part of the failures that we ran into was maybe misalignment around my expectations and them and their expectations on taking on the role.
This is so key, Rasmus, because I have heard many CEOs tell me, oh my gosh, we went through 3, 4, 6 we went through 6 VPs of sales. Why? And when I ask them, more questions about it, it really turns out that it was the expectation wasn't set properly. The VPs were not set up for success. The CEO really didn't understand their role in sales once they had a sales leader in place.
Yeah.
And that makes it difficult.
It makes it difficult. I mean, you're hiring, you're not hiring to replace yourself. You're hiring to have someone organize and build the effort. That's a very different part. And I also feel like as a founder, when I reach out, or a CEO and reach out about a meeting, it's pretty easy to get a meeting. Like, hey, I'm the founder CEO. Do you want to chat about this? Yeah, like most people will take the meeting. Very different when you're building a sales team with 25 people and a BDR reaches out. And so I think there is this gap between the CEO understanding that when we start scaling this, we really need to understand why we're winning and how we're winning. And it's not about the product and features. It's much more about the customer and their journey with our solution and how they are using it to impact their business. And yeah, I think the other part is most CEOs have never built a sales team. So while they have sold the product themselves, they actually never organized the sales team and thought about the documentation and how you document and train and build a repetitive, measurable process. And so I think before you've done it yourself, it's really hard to qualify for it. I leaned a lot on my board and advisors when I hired my sales leaders to my last company. Yeah. And, they can only help me so much. Yeah, this person could do great, but like, we don't actually know. And, it's at the end of the day, it's my decision.
You said some very key things, I think, that CEOs don't recognize, especially if they don't come from sales. Did you actually do any selling before you became a CEO?
Only as an entrepreneur. Like, I never worked in a sales function before. Like, it's been much more technology and that type of role that I've had. So I'd say I think of myself more maybe initially as a product CEO that's transitioned into a sales CEO, if you put it that way.
Right. And so coming from that, background, and then you're like, okay, of course I have to sell when I am beginning. So the founder-led sales, like you said, it's fairly easy to get on the phone with a CEO or a senior leader of a company when your title is founder or CEO. So that works really well. But then you get some misconceptions as a CEO thinking, oh, I'm going to hire some salespeople and it will be easy for them as well, right? So that transition from founder-led sales into building a sales organization, right? So that not just your sellers, but all the people in your company who support sales understand what they're supposed to do. And as CEO, you now know that you will always have a role in sales, but that role changes as your company matures, right? So having gone through these 3 different sales leaders, you finally had the aha, oh, maybe it's me that I have to set them up for success. I need to have a better understanding of what a sales leader should be doing. And I need to support them maybe in a different way than I have been.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it also moved the focus maybe a little bit from my sales team and their efforts and more to the customer and their experience. I think that, it's easy to say as a CEO, hey, I got 10 meetings last week. You should be able to get 10 meetings. But my meetings are very different than what someone else's meetings are, and the outcomes may be different. And so the part of the learning, I think, is as I started supporting the sales leader in a more active way, was really, I need to understand deeply, why are we winning in this part of the market, and how are we winning here? Like, what people are we engaging with? That's much more important than what features do I have in my product, how much great ROI can I do. That all comes later if I don't have the first part. And it's so easy to start hiring or recruiting, more BDRs, get more leads, get more managers, get more directors. But if you don't know why you're winning and how you're winning, then you're just going to spray and pray, increase your CAC, and burn through your capital. And that's a bad experience, trust me.
100%. Well, that understanding why you're winning is so important. And I just want to take a minute to say that I see a lot of companies doing what they call win-loss reviews, not win-loss analysis. That's like something that an outside company does and calls your clients and stuff, but just sitting, and going through the pipeline and looking at what they won and what they lost. And they tend to focus more on what they lost. And I tend to be like, forget what you lost. What did you win, and why did you win it? That will prevent you from losing more deals. Spend more time looking at the deals you won, right? And analyzing those. And that should get you further down the road. So I love that you had that focus on that. So let's kind of go back to the beginning, right? I think we'll actually start at the beginning of Kobold. And what were you doing? Give us a little short history of Rasmus and all of you're a serial entrepreneur, all the things that you've started that led you to, starting Kobold and then exiting Cobalt. And like you said, the problems you had at Cobalt made you start Ressemble. So I want to talk kind of about that journey, because it's so interesting how one thing leads to another.
Yeah. Well, I guess the best place to start is, like, I actually started my first business when I was in middle school. This was mid-90s, building custom-made computers and selling them to people working remotely or home offices. And then when I was in high school, I started my first software company and started building software. So I was really interested in technology, as you can hear. Now, I grew up in Sweden. I ended up closing down my first company there, software business, in 2003. And during that time, I'd gone to law school on the side.
Oh my goodness.
And I decided to move
just on the side. I'll just go to law school. I'm doing all those other things.
I moved to the US to get a year abroad. Ended up coming to Boston and got a doctorate in law here in the US. So I got my degree from Duke eventually. I got a degree from BU as well, law school. But during that time, I started practicing law as an attorney here in the US, and worked at a firm called Gunderson Detmer, which is really focused on venture capital, setting up funds, helping them invest in startup companies. So, ran across a lot of the big stars from the early 2000s, like Twitter, Facebook, Segway, like fun companies to work on. So it's exciting. But during that process, I was involved in fund formation. So I started seeing how are funds being set up and what are the inefficiencies around that. And so then I ran into two friends, really, or they became really close friends, but Mike and Patrick, and they were starting a company. We called the company initially Bison, and then rebranded it as Cobalt. So the three of us, I basically left my legal career, joined as a co-founder with Mike and Patrick, and that's really where the first company came from. So it was combining my experience from having been setting up funds with technology. That was kind of what I think I can bring to it. Now, fast forward 8 years, I started Ressemble, much because of the journey I had as a CEO, working with sales leader, looking at leadership of sales and of revenue growth, and looking at the trend in the market where we're getting tons of new tools for our reps to reach out, connect with people, record stuff, everything we want to do. We are, investing heavily in our CRM to store all this data. We have all these different communication channels to communicate. And there was no place that really brought it together for the sales leaders. And that's what I became interested in. So Ressemble started from that journey.
So you wanted to make it easier for sales leaders to do their job. And you learned that while you were going through these 3 different sales leaders when you were at Cobalt. It's always interesting to me how entrepreneurs, one thing leads to another, right? And you come up with these ideas because you had a problem and you're trying to solve your own problem, and then it turns into a product and a company. So I think that is awesome. I love that your background in law, has helped you. That's pretty cool,
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of weird not to practice given I have too many law degrees to count, but it definitely helps you analyze and understand problems and communicate and focus in on all of that. So that's a benefit. But I think eventually, like a lot of these degrees you need to follow what you're curious about, and that's probably where the entrepreneurial part of me comes from, at least.
Yeah. What a law degree doesn't teach you is how to sell, right? And so,
Nope.
that's the problem that you had with Kobold is, okay, I'm going to do this founder-led sales, and then I'm going to just hire someone else and they're going to take it away and do it, and it's going to be great. How could you know any different, right? You just think that that's the way that it works. But you're not unlike many of the CEOs that I work with and that I interview, and thinking that, hey, someone else can take over sales and I can go focus on some other things to grow the company. And it just isn't that way. And I think when these companies are floundering, after 7, 8, 10 years, it is because the CEO has stepped away from sales and does no longer, like you said, know why they're winning the deals, or know what the customer journey is, or what sales really needs to support that customer journey. And I know you've probably seen this as well. The way a human being makes a decision hasn't changed, but the buyer behavior has changed so much. But we're not keeping up with that on the sales side, right? And it may be because CEOs have outdated ideas about what sales is.
Yeah, I think there are 2 parts to it. One part is, and one of my big, great advisors through this journey, kind of a CEO coach, sales coach that I worked a lot with, Frank Candio. Yeah, he always made the kind of comparison to, like, you're out sailing and then suddenly the weather changes. Like, the market is always changing.
Right.
So my conception of what the market was 2012 doesn't apply 2016, doesn't apply 2020. And
Right.
So this idea that I know why we're winning, that has to be fed constantly with new insight and information from our customers, from prospects, from competitors, from consultants or people in the market. So I think that's one part. The other part, as you mentioned, is sales itself is changing. Like, people are coming to the sales conversation today. They already have 80 tools installed in their business. They don't want to add 81. They want to take out 10, rather. They're getting fed so many messages every day, and they have access to the internet. They can look up information about their business. They are more educated about the problem than they were. And so before, I think salespeople were more brokers of insight around this service and offering. Today, I see us more as maybe a concierge, someone who's guiding my buyer on their journey. And my job is to help frame the problem, help them understand how it would impact their organization, how they can adopt our solution.
Yeah, so true. I'm just curious, as a CEO, what sources do you look to? What do you read to keep yourself apprised of what's changing out there in the world of sales, or, the way that the buyers want to buy? What kinds of things help you stay up to date on that?
Well, I think my product experience shines through here. I spend a lot of time on Hacker News from Y Combinator. I find that that's a tremendous source of insight about companies and entrepreneurship, and how technology is being adopted in companies. So that's one kind of big source for me. The other source, I think, are more communities, like talking to sales leaders actively myself, talking to people like you, like really trying to constantly have, or every week have, at least 5 conversations with sales leaders about how are they buying, how are they selling, how are they, what are they seeing,
Yeah.
So it's an active effort. I don't think there are any great sources. Like you can't go to a data provider and say, I want to understand the market in this segment. You could order a custom research report, but that's an analyst calling up the same people you could call up. So I'd rather build it into my
Call your
day.
own customers and ask
Yeah,
them, right? I mean,
exactly.
what's changed at your organization? What's making it hard for you to buy? Not just buy from us, but buy in general. What is changing the way that you think about things? I had the opportunity this week to talk with Hank Barnes, who is one of the analysts at Gartner, and he's on the he works with tech companies, and he is always researching what the buyers are doing in purchasing technology. And his recent article, which I can send to you, and I can also put it in the show notes for everyone, is on buyer regret for technology. So, right, you're selling technology, you're selling software, you want people to buy and adopt it, but you've got these huge buying committees now in companies where it's like, okay, why is that person even involved in buying this? But somehow they are, because a lot of these products cross over many departments now and things like that. And you're trying to learn about each person and kind of what makes them tick and why they want to buy this and what they're afraid of and all the things that you need to know, to help them make a good decision. And then meanwhile, you've got just all the outside pressures, right, on everything. And you're trying to help these people make a decision. And they're so fatigued from the buying process inside of their own company, which is, they can barely navigate it, right? And then maybe they've never bought anything like this before, so they don't really understand how to buy what you sell. And, our salespeople, I don't think, are totally equipped to handle this whole picture of what we have to do to guide buyers to a good decision these days. And so, Hank was saying that these buyers have regret, not regret that they bought your product, but just regret about the whole process and how much time it took and what's happening. So it like following people like Hank helps me stay abreast of, the research on what the buyers are thinking. But I'm curious what you've run into on that.
Yeah, I think he's saying something important. Obviously, the more enterprise you go, the more people are involved in the conversation. You can easily have my old clients who were sold to private equity. We could have 10, 12, 15 people involved in the decision. And so that process, you're opening a can of worms, and the person who's the champion may not necessarily know what they're getting into. I agree with that. The other part I feel like that buyers are really worried about is how do we adopt this tool? That's something we discovered when we started building Ressemble, which built for the sales leader, is that one of the biggest fears of sales leaders was, I don't want to buy something that would create a additional thing to do for my team. Like that's just it's a non-starter.
Well, the number one complaint of sales leaders is, I don't have enough time.
Yeah.
I need to coach my people and I don't have enough time to do it because I'm pulled in all these different directions. So then you're going to give them a new tool, right? And then say, now learn this tool. And so if we're helping buy that product, we're thinking, will we get adoption? Will these sales leaders actually use it?
Yeah, no, and will the sales rep use it? I think is the fear of the sales leader. So a lot of my education when I talk about Ressemble and how we drive value for our clients is actually you as a sales leader can adopt this. Your reps stay where they are. They stay, we're partnering with HubSpot. We focused on the HubSpot ecosystem for sales. We can get into why, because I think it's a super interesting market in how they are playing against Salesforce. But separately, I think we basically, our pitch to the sales leader is, you guys, your team stays with HubSpot. They use HubSpot when they do prospecting and follow up and take notes and whatever they want to do. But you as a sales leader are no longer kind of scattered around Gong, HubSpot, Slack, email, etc., spreadsheets. Instead, you're in Ressemble and you can do all of that from one place and it feeds right into HubSpot.
Wow.
We record more stuff into HubSpot.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I want to talk a little bit about how you grew sales at Kobold and then how that is influencing you on how you're growing sales at Ressemble. So when you first started Cobalt, you mentioned you had two co-founders that were working with you, and you already had a foothold in the private equity world, right? So you had some connections and some people. But how did you start growing sales there? You know, you built a team and such, but tell us a little more about that, and then how that's roll right into how that's impacted what you've decided to do at Ressemble to grow sales.
Yeah, I think so. When we started Cobalt, so I had some connections. One of my co-founders had a ton of connections. He'd been an investor in the space too.
Yeah.
So we had a good Rolodex to go back to the olden days. Initially, we tried kind of an enterprise sales effort into the market, and that was extremely hard, took long. We burned through a lot of our capital, ended up changing that strategy after about 9 months and zero success. And what we did initially was basically just created a weekly newsletter that we got more and more readers to, that covered kind of what's happening in the market and providing insight around that. That's how we started building a network. Then we collected data, and when we started selling, we basically could promote it to our existing audience at that time. And it was several thousand people reading that every week. So that became a good introduction for us to get our first product out. Now, the first product we sold for like $192 per year. So it wasn't a lot of money to compare. Like when I sold the last product that I was involved, the deal at that company, it was $160K per year. So we increased our ACV a little bit over time, but
a little bit, like 1,000%.
But the early sales of that was really driven by that community we had built around the market. And a lot of people were really interested in the private markets. This is like 2011, 2012. It's been growing 4x since that time. So it's a very attractive market sector for investors to play in.
So that newsletter drove inbound for you, so you had inquiries to respond to?
Basically, the newsletter created an audience. So we had, a list of people that we knew were in the market that were engaging with us.
Okay.
And then when we started promoting our product, we could, first of all, ask people for feedback on it in that newsletter. We could say, hey, we're going to this conference, meet up with us. But we already had a following, if you put it that way.
Gotcha.
This was more, it's interesting as I look back at it. It wasn't, I'm not sure we were intentional about it. We probably more did it because of necessity. Our initial product didn't work. We had to do something. This became the kind of stopgap while we built the second product that was going to work. And we used use that time to build this community.
I think that's really amazing, Rasmus. I mean, building a following is, I think it's a neglected tactic. I think it's really important that companies put out great content and build a following. I think HubSpot's a great example of a company that did that. So content driven in the beginning, right?
Yeah.
And there's several other companies who have done it as well. So they just have fans, right? They have not buying from them yet, but they build that network, they build that community, and they have those fans.
Well, I think there are two things there. I think today it's interesting with product-led growth. A lot of people think you build a product, you put it out there, and people will come.
Yeah.
And the reality is, no, they don't come at all. No one cares. If you have a following and people come, then you could potentially lure them with product-led growth. But that's
right.
It's not a chicken and egg problem. It's very much you got to have the following before you do product-led growth.
Right.
The second part, I think, is on the community building is finding your voice. Like finding something you're comfortable talking about in the industry that people are trying to learn about. And that was very easy with Cobalt. That's been harder when I moved into sales. So a lot of the journey for me as I started Ressemble has been selling into sales is a very different experience than selling into private equity and venture capital and the private markets. And so that has meant number one, I'm not I can't call someone and say, hey, this is how you should do sales. Like, I don't feel like I'm in a position to do that, but I can absolutely call someone and say, hey, here's what's happening with technology in sales. Here's how HubSpot plays in. Here's Salesforce. Here are the challenges you run into. Here's why you're having poor adoption. Like, those are things I can talk about any day. And that's where, I think my voice has come from in this market, solving that type of problem rather than the, how do I actually win the deal? That there are a lot of people that are much better on that than I am.
Yeah. Interesting. So you grew sales, you got this following going, you had the first product, then you moved into the second product and you already had the following. So then you could, call them for appointments, meet up with them at conferences, things like that. Did you have direct sellers or did you establish a channel or both?
We built direct sellers for the first 5 years, was all direct, using conferences primarily as a lead gen effort, and then building a BDR and sales effort where we called on people and emailed people and used our following. About 5 years in, we brought in a partner and they became a major investor in a company too. Then we decided to use them to sell to part of the market while we focused on the other part. So that became more of a partnership sales. So I learned a little bit about channel sales through them. But we still continued with direct sales on a primary market space that we were going after.
So what were some of the lessons you learned about sales along the way? So I know, hiring a sales leader was one, and determining how to best support a sales leader if they could be successful. But what were some of the other lessons you learned along the way?
I think a lot of my learning has to do, it's not so much about me, it's about them more. Like, I think that has been a big learning. Like, why are customers buying this product? So why is this individual involved in this purchasing decision? And why is this organization going to want to adopt this? And one of the big things there when it comes to technology is the cost of change is really powerful. Like, people don't necessarily want to change. That's status quo is comfortable. And that's a big competitor. And if I can't educate my buyer around that, then I'm ultimately going to lose most of my deals. So I think I'm very focused on that journey as a person selling today. So that's been one big thing. The other big part for me is, and I've always been a little bit skeptical of, it's just metrics. Like, I wonder a little bit what metrics. Like, we're really good at collecting a lot of data, but what are we really learning from that data? So I think that's another part that I focus in on when I listen into great sales leaders or work with sales coaches or other executives. I love how they ask, open-ended questions about why, and it gets the sales rep thinking about their strategy, and then they can become a resource for the sales rep as they unlock the opportunity. But that's very different than a CEO coming in and saying, here's how you do the pitch, here's what you need to cover. Like that doesn't really work. So those have been two big
learnings. Doesn't work, does it? It's terrible, actually, because again, the CEO, the founder can get away with so much that a salesperson cannot get away with. You said something I think is really key for the sellers to understand today, that when we are selling, what we're actually doing is asking people to make a change. And most people don't like change and they're uncomfortable with it, even when they know they have to do it, right? And so I'm curious, how do you train your salespeople in change management? Because I don't see that. Like, I don't see that as, here, I offer training in change management for sellers. It's not something that's really out there, and it's starting to make me think, wow, maybe I should do something about that. But I don't think that sellers necessarily understand that they're leading buyers to make a change, and that change management is key. And I would guess that most sellers don't know how to guide change management.
No, I think this relates a little bit back to the fact that sales organizations are becoming more specialized and have more specialized functions. So like the way we dealt with it at Kobold was that initially, the sales team was a BDR and an AE, but then over time it was a sales engineer that was involved in every deal. We had a professional services arm that had to work with the AE to create a report on how the implementation would happen. We had a customer success person that was dedicated to them to help them understand how they were going to consume and actually utilize it and how we were going to train them on it. So what happened, at least for Cobalt, was a very specialized function where we, for every given deal, we had like 5 or 6 people that were involved. And those were the deals we won, were the ones where everyone was involved and we could present the best foot forward. When you pitch the managing partners at some of the world's largest private equity firms, you don't want to mess that up. You want to get that right. For Ressemble, it's, different today. It's, my biggest challenge with sales for Ressemble is much more, it's me, it's myself. And then, that's it. And so not only do I have
your own coach and your own salesperson, you get to coach yourself on how to sell better.
It's like, but I think when I work with a ton of founders, as a peer, but also as an investor sometimes. And one of the things I notice a lot is founders are very quick to start hiring people that are prospecting or getting them more leads, and they want to focus on closing the deals. One of the big learnings, if I think back, that just connect back to this, is I think founders and CEOs are more effective early in the sales cycle than late. It's the why and the urgency that the founder can bring. And then you can build functions around customer success, professional services, onboarding, training. All of that is pretty easy to build process around and document. It's really hard to build a really great urgency and why generator at the top of the funnel.
Right. Oh, I agree with you. And I think that that's a really key thing when you think about setting up a sales organization to grow your sales. What role can the CEO play, especially early, right? And then once that sales organization is built and you have your other mechanisms around it, the CEO's role is going to change again. But you're right. The prospecting is so much easier when the CEO founder uses their connections and gets those initial calls done and then brings in a team, and then the team can take it from there, versus the other way around where we have some 25, 27-year-old calling CEOs who really don't want to talk to them, who don't answer their phones and aren't going to respond, right? So it is interesting that you're right. And I do caution CEOs on that when they start hiring, or even later on. I mean, I work with some very mature companies who still don't have that sales growth, really on the right track. They're still doing it the hard way. They're still having people send cold emails and do cold calling, and they're getting very minimal results from that, especially these days. I mean, when I was young, used to be you could pick up the phone and talk to a senior leader on the phone. They would talk to you, but it just doesn't happen today very often. And so I think that we have to rethink the way that we're doing things now. And I think the CEO can play a really important role as evangelist, right?
Yeah.
So, right now you're in the throes of it because you just started Ressemble, but when you were at Kobold, like you said, you did the founder-led growth in the beginning, but then as it grew up, your role changed considerably, and you were still able to assist the salespeople, but in a completely different way. And I think evangelizing is one of the ways, because if our CEO is out in front doing webinars, being interviewed, podcasts, writing articles, things like that, you get a following, right? Because people want to follow that person. And then it's just like you said with Cobalt, after you've got the following, there's lots of things you can do with that following. But I think people are really missing this. And instead, they're doing sales the hard way.
Yeah, no, you want to come in as CEO and close the deal. Like, that's how you think of yourself. And it's actually the opposite. It's better to let the sales executives and sales reps close the deal, and you come in early, you promote the urgency, you help the prospect see what change could lead to and the upsides of that. You're passionate about it, you care about it, like people are going to want to talk to you about that, and that helps drive the sale eventually. And you already have that urgency and will to change early on. So I think that's key, but I also think, when I do early sales now, a lot of it is me using, I think LinkedIn has become like the number one tool really today for building relationships and having introductions to people that could potentially buy our software. And we have about 25 customers now. So we're starting to get out of the early stages. But when I think about scaling that effort, my next hire is more likely a customer success person than it is a BDR. Like BDR will come much, much later in my mind.
Right. I love that approach. And I've talked to several CEOs who have that approach, which is get this customer success up and running. Why? Because you close deals, but these, especially in software, right? It depends on user adoption, and the customer success person is best to do that. Plus, we have to start talking about adoption way earlier in the sales cycle. Okay, you're going to buy this, but if people don't use it next year when it's time to renew, or 3 years when it's time to renew, you're not going to renew it because your user adoption is so low. So it needs to come in earlier in the sales cycle, and customer success people are specialists in user adoption, or they should be, right?
Yeah.
And so we want to get them into the buyer's journey, the buyer's buying cycle earlier on, so that they can be saying, listen, if you decide to make this purchase, here are the things, that's just the beginning, right? Here are the things that are going to happen once you've made this purchase. Are you prepared to do those things? How can we help you do those things, right? So I love that you're thinking about hiring customer success people next. And then also you mentioned when we were chatting earlier that a partner strategy would be part of the way that you sell at Ressemble. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we're focused on the HubSpot ecosystem, and a lot of mid-market companies, if I define that the HubSpot way, that means companies 50 to 200 are really starting to use HubSpot HubSpot is, I feel like, turning into the number one CRM in that little segment. And then companies graduate still into Salesforce. A lot of that is driven by sales leaders feeling like they can't do what they need in HubSpot yet. So I think there's an opportunity for Ressemble to come in here, work with sales leaders, and really give them a unique experience.
Yeah.
HubSpot is a fantastic tool for the lead gen and for the kind of staying in touch, prospecting, and all of that with the market. So our partner strategy, obviously, we're listing with HubSpot. We're engaging with them on inbound. Yeah. I'm trying to befriend pretty much every customer success manager at HubSpot there is in the world. If you're out there, reach out to me. Love to talk to you. I'm also trying to get to know a lot of the partners that are implementing and helping customers utilize HubSpot, because I think that's this goes back to this change management adoption. It's more and more technology is driven by the fact, can we actually use this software afterwards? And so these partners, elite partners, platinum partners of HubSpot, obviously I want to educate them on what we're doing. I want to show them that we can engage the C-level and sales leadership in the organization to daily use our tool. That's going to make HubSpot more valuable. It's going to make them more valuable. So that's where I'm spending time on the partnership side today.
When do you think you'll start hiring salespeople?
I think salespeople, as I mentioned, I think I'll probably hire 1 or 2 CS reps before, and then the next hire would most likely be an account executive that can close deals. And that's probably where my sales hiring will start. That's probably about 6 months to a year away right now, depending a little bit on, I think we can easily get to a customer base of 100 to 200 before we even need to think about that. Because it's all about delighting early customers now, making sure that they are successful, that they are adopting it, using the tool. Mm-hmm. And that will help us drive up the price, that will help us show the ROI, and establishing a message that we can use for sales reps.
Yeah. Gosh, that sounds like a great plan. All right. So before we part ways today, and I'll be watching to see how this all goes. I see, gosh, the time just flew by. It's been great talking with you, but just the last word, what advice do you have for CEOs who want to be serial entrepreneur like you? And, what can you leave us with?
Well, I think just follow your passion. Like, I think if you're not passionate about it, it's really hard to dedicate your life to something, and it takes longer than you expect. So you gotta wanna spend time with the people you're selling to, and really be like passionate and curious about their life, because that's what's gonna drive success.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Rasmus, for being on with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Alice. Psyched to be here.
Thanks for tuning in to Sales Talk for CEOs. You can find me at alicehyman.com. Be sure and connect with me on LinkedIn and let me know that you heard the show. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe, write a review, and share the show with another CEO.